Welcome to my channel. My name is Rahan and I'm a final year medical student who enjoys creating content. And as you can tell by the title, I want to make my case for which I would get for university if I were to start all over again. Before we go ahead, you need to ask yourself a few important questions. First of all, what is your budget? Secondly, how do you plan on studying? So do you want to use Notability? Do you want to use Word or flashcards? Or what is it that you plan on studying with? And do you plan on doing any creative work? So editing, Photoshop, music production, or even graphic design. To make my case, I'm going to introduce to you 4 students, including myself, each with their own needs and uses, but representative of the general student population, I guess. And the timestamps are below. So if you do feel that you don't fit the criteria for this student, then feel free to skip to the section that relates to you. The first person I'd like to introduce is the Studious One. So they require something that meets their everyday study needs and usually won't push their machine anything beyond that. Second person I'd like to introduce is the artist, who has a decent budget and their creative work involves graphic design and digital art, and they require something that allows them to do that. And then we've got the third student, a podcaster and a coder. They require something with a little bit more power, but they can't justify the hefty price tags for some of the larger MacBook Pros available. And then we've got myself. So I am a video editor and I need something that not only meets my study needs but also gives me the option to edit videos. So let's start off with the Studious One. The reasonable option available would include the MacBook Air and the iPad Air, and anything higher than this would be an inefficient use of technology. It can, however, be difficult to choose between the Air models of the MacBook and the iPad, and at the time of filming, the cheapest MacBook Air with student discount is available for £900, whereas the equivalent iPad with the same 256GB of storage is £685. Both are more than capable of handling note taking. They've got enough storage for notes, pictures and videos. The difference in price is around £200. The problem is, as a student, you'd be paying £200 more for less features. And let me explain what I mean by this. The iPad Air is capable of making notes, organizing them using GoodNotes and Notability, drawing using a pencil, having this full Microsoft package which includes Word and PowerPoint and everything else you can do on the MacBook Air. I've actually found that filling in forms is much easier on the iPad than on my laptop, and I can easily switch between typing to drawing. If I need to sign a form, I'd rather do it on my iPad, which kind of makes the MacBook Air obsolete in a sense. However, it has a special place for my friend and flatmate. You see, he's a very traditional man. He loves his cup of tea and a book first thing in the morning, and he loves a sense of security that a laptop provides for him. And an iPad Air wouldn't make the cut for him. He described it as a gimmick in this capitalistic society that we live in. However, if you disagree, go for the iPad Air and get yourself a keyboard and a pencil and have a companion that is just as powerful as the laptop equivalent. Now, just to add, if you haven't already switched to using GoodNotes and Notability rather than using Word or OneNote to create your notes, honestly, you should consider it because it has so much capability. There's so much that you can do. The second is the artist. Now, the options available include the iPad Air and the iPad Pro, both of which are reasonable products which are more than capable of meeting all her needs. At the time of filming, the iPad Air with enough memory for students costs around £685, and the iPad Pro, however, will set you back £730. The price difference, I guess, wouldn't be enough to sway people either way, so we can move on to functionality. Both iPads are capable of making notes, that's for certain. In fact, both iPads are basically the same in terms of functionality. The main difference between them is the processor. So the iPad Air has a newer chip which has a faster single core performance, and that basically translates into a few milliseconds of advantage in everyday use, which you probably won't even notice. But the iPad Pro has a slightly more powerful multi-core chip performance, which might give you a slight edge in multitasking. However, the difference won't be noticed by most people. What I'm trying to say is they're basically the same. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail when it comes to refresh rate and LiDAR scanners because, quite frankly, it doesn't really matter for most students. Our artists would be fine with either the iPad Air or the iPad Pro because both allow her to annotate and draw her notes out. And at the same time, she can pursue semi-professional creative work on both devices. In my opinion, I personally go for the iPad Air, and my reason for this is the availability of double the storage. When I mentioned the prices earlier, I stated the price for the 256 gigabyte iPad Air, and the price that I stated earlier was for the 128 gig iPad Pro. Now, even with the difference in memory, the iPad Air comes out cheaper and still packs enough power to meet all of your needs. Moving on to the programmer and our podcaster friend. If I were to make this video in 2019 or 2020, the only option available would have been the MacBook Pro 13-inch because MacBook Airs were rubbish. However, we're in 2021 and Apple have genuinely changed the game with the release of their M1 chips. Now, I don't plan on going into the detail about how the M1 chip is different to the standard Intel processors, but look at it this way. The M1 chip uses a simplified processor architecture and an instruction set which uses less power, and it's called RISC. As a result, it's way more heat efficient. It performs way faster than the Intel equivalent, which is based on the CISC architecture. Now, moments like this are quite rare when it comes to tech because it's low-key revolutionary. The cheaper version of the Mac, which for once in everyone's lifetime, Apple have actually started to provide a great deal of value in a cheaper pack product. To give you an idea of how impressive this is, I struggled to edit in 4K on my 2018 MacBook Pro 13-inch, and the temperature would get to around 70 degrees Celsius. If I wanted, I could edit in 4K on a MacBook Air base model. In terms of pricing, the MacBook Air with the new chip starts at around £900, with the MacBook Pro 13-inch starting at around £1,170. So a £270 difference in pricing. In terms of what you get for the £270 extra, well, you get a fan included in the Pro and you get a touch bar. These are the only differences which may actually affect your decision-making process.
To be honest, I'm not a massive fan of the touch bar. If I had two MacBooks and one had the touch bar and one didn't, I would pay more money to have the one without the touch bar. I think physical buttons are much better for stuff like volume, the escape key, and when you look at all the Apple ads, you see all these mad uses with different apps using it differently. In real life, I've never used it once. It's much easier just to use keyboard shortcuts. So my recommendation is don't get it.
I guess that's completely up to you whether or not you want to pay £270 for a touch bar. The fan, however, will be helpful if you're coding to a certain extent. It will help you use the M1 chip to its full potential without any signs of thermal throttling on the higher end of intensity. But for general programmers and amateur creatives, the MacBook Air is more than sufficient for all of your daily needs. So for our programmer, podcaster who requires a chip powerful enough to handle the likes of VS Code and Logic Pro, I'd recommend the MacBook Pro 13-inch based on the potential in the future to further expand your work and be able to cope with all of the workload that you throw at it without any issues. And then we come to myself, the video editor. Now this may sound odd. Could you literally hold back for a few months? Because in a few months' time, the M1 chip will be updated. Let me know which category you fall into. Are you the studious one? Are you the artist? Are you the videographer, the programmer, the podcaster? Or maybe you just don't like Apple products but you just wanted to waste your time watching this video. Let me know whichever category you fall into. If you want, create your own category. Thanks for watching, and yeah, bye for now guys.